Man, I'm always hearing this discourse about how Gen Z is always burnt out. We're so depressed. Gen Z is so lazy. Gen Z is so anxious and nihilistic all the damn time. And it's always something negative. And the latest one is that somehow people in Gen Z are aging faster than people in other generations, and that they look a lot older than they actually are. So I don't know how true this is, but it made me think of why this might be the case. And what came to mind is how we have so many of these societal and cultural expectations on us that we're just crumbling on under the weight. It's just impossible to meet all of these expectations. For example, a couple of years ago, I was in this online self-improvement community, and I remember there were these 15 and 16-year-old kids who were talking about how they felt like shit because they weren't making $10,000 a month online. You even had people who were 22 or 23 talking about how they felt like they were total losers because they hadn't become millionaires yet and they hadn't retired their parents in some fancy mansion. And look, some of you might say, oh, that's just social media. And while that's true, that a lot of these entrepreneurship influencers, a lot of these hustle culture gurus have really created this ridiculous standard where if you're not a millionaire before the age of like 26 or 25, I mean, every year this number goes down. If you're not a millionaire by that age and you haven't retired your parents, you're a failure of a man. Or if you don't have the perfect jawline, if you don't have the perfect aesthetic physique, then you're a loser. So having these cultural expectations is not really something that only Gen Z deals with, but I feel like not only is Gen Z dealing with these new cultural expectations that have really arisen from the era of social media and influencers, but we are also taking on all of the cultural expectations that all the previous generations had growing up as well. It's like all of those generations' expectations are just piling up, and it's gotten to the point where it's just a ridiculous amount of standards that we have to live up to in order to be considered successful. And even if you get 99 out of 100 of these random standards and criteria, you're still a loser because there's always going to be somebody out there who has more of these expectations met. So it wasn't like this before, because imagine if you're just a regular baby boomer growing up in the 60s and 70s during the most prosperous era of not just American history, but really just world history. And you grow up in a society that is very homogenous. Let's be honest, America back then was like 95% white or so. Everyone around you looks the same, and you guys have a very cohesive sense of shared culture and shared beliefs. And it was very community oriented. So when you grow up in a very high trust society like that, it's much easier to meet people, to get married and settle down. And also, the macroeconomic conditions at the time allowed you to just work some random fry cook job at McDonald's, and you could support a family of 4 or 5 on just that income. So after maybe a year and a half of working, you could buy your first house, and then after that, you could raise a family and then buy a second house, a third house, fourth house, fifth house. And by the time your kids are ready to be sent to college, well, all of your assets have appreciated 20, 30 times. So if you bought a house when you were like 23 as a baby boomer, by the time that you've had your first child and your child is ready to go to college, then your house is appreciated 20 times. So at that point, you're just coasting. So those expectations were just ridiculously easy to meet. It was ridiculously easy to get married, ridiculously easy to get a job and get a house and stuff and build wealth. So that was it. But then you had Gen X, who is growing up in the continuation of that economic growth. And so this is when we have more of this culture of excess that has been popularized in a lot of these movies that were coming out at the time. I'm talking about things like all of these movies, these coming of age movies that a lot of us might have watched when we were younger, like American Pie or Project X or Superbad, that were promoting this party and hookup lifestyle. So I guess a lot of these expectations got sort of added on to the previous expectations of just getting a job, getting a house, getting married and stuff. And now it's like, well, we want to maximize our pleasure here so during our limited time on earth. So it became more about drinking and partying and hooking up and this whole sexual liberation stuff. So it was like all of these extra expectations where you had to lose your virginity by a certain age, that you had to be going out and partying all the time. And I feel like a lot of these carried on to the millennial generation and then also to Gen Z as well, to a slightly lesser extent. I've actually seen this sort of hookup culture and party culture, binge drinking culture die down a bit with younger generations, which I actually see as a pretty good thing. But anyway, back to my earlier point. We are living with the expectations of all of these previous generations just stacked up on each other. For example, the boomers, they only had to live up to these boomer cultural expectations, like get a job, get a house, get married. Okay, easy. But then Gen X, they had their own set of cultural expectations, but that was added on top of the boomer expectations. But that was still kind of easy. There's a few extra things you felt like you had to do to be considered cool or successful. And then millennials, same thing. But around that time, that's when the economy begins to stagnate with this globalization crap. And then companies are offshoring all the jobs or just bringing in foreign labor to cut down on costs so that they could replace American workers and undercut American wages. And this is when when wages start to really stagnate while cost of living keeps going up and keeps skyrocketing, asset prices keep skyrocketing. And so millennials are really the first generation to feel this sort of rug pull. And then when you get to Gen Z, we have all of these other cultural expectations just stacked up on top of us. We're expected to not just get a job, but get a really high-paying job, 6 figures. We're not just expected to get married, we're expected to have all of these, I guess, sexual experiences before we do so that we could be an experienced man or an alpha male. And then we have to find the perfect 10 out of 10 woman for us, the perfect love of our lives. And we have to do all this other stuff influenced by social media to be considered cool. We have to make $10,000 a month passive income, retire our parents, and become a multi-millionaire before age 30. And so there's no way anybody could possibly meet all of these expectations. And so I guess a lot of people are just buckling under the weight or just checking out altogether, which is what I did and really what I advocate other people to do, because none of these expectations are the least bit legitimate at all, period. Because all of the expectations on previous generations were only possible because of the wider macroeconomic landscape. And all of that is tanking for our generation. Even a lot of people I know who are in very high-paying jobs, the types of jobs that people in older generations expect us to have, even they are struggling to meet rent and groceries and car payments and all of this other crap. So it's ridiculous to judge us for not being successful while at the same time you are actively making it harder for young people to succeed. So anyway, that's why I just say all of these cultural expectations are just vestiges from this bygone baby boomer era, this post-World War II prosperity era. And now we've kind of entered this era of managed decline. And to be honest, I get it, there's not really much any of us as young people can really do about it. Like politically. There's no voting your way out of this. Obviously, the older generations, they have an incentive to make sure housing prices keep rising. And they've made it abundantly clear they just don't care about the younger generations. So you know what? We might as well just say, fuck all that and just pursue our own goals. Do the things that make us feel fulfilled. All right? Like, stop playing into this rat race ideology so that you can keep up with the Joneses and be seen as not a failure by wider society. So yeah, and that's pretty much all I have to say for today. If you agree with what I had to say or have anything to add on to it, feel free to leave a like and comment or subscribe if you like to see this sort of content. And with that, I will see you on the next one.